Welcome to the Sports Podcast that will put you in the zone all the time. Welcome to Pack Sports Zone with me, your host, Peter Pacman Clarke. What's up, guys? We're here for another episode of Pack Sports Zone, and this is the fantasy football edition, as I know a lot of you guys have been waiting for a while. Here are some sleepers. Here how I think the round's going to go. There's been a little bit of news this week, obviously, with Travis Etienne getting hurt. There's been more news with Sony Michel getting traded to the Rams. So what does that do for Darrell Henderson? So got a lot of questions off Twitter. Got a lot of reports and rankings to put out for you guys. Tell you some draft strategies that I feel that's going to go on this year because I've already done a couple drafts. So this is the fantasy show. If you want to get everything done with your fantasy league, this is the show to listen to. But let's just start this off pretty fast because this is probably going to be a full show because I'm talking about every single position with quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends. And I'll even give you a couple defenses that I think will be top 5 defenses this year. So let's start this off with the quarterbacks. Now, first thing I want to talk about is when do you take the first quarterback? The first quarterback, obviously, most people are going to take either Lamar Jackson. Some people are going to take Patrick Mahomes. Some people even pick Josh Allen. And some people that may still even pick Aaron Rodgers. Those are probably the top 4 quarterbacks, unless you do have a little bit of trust in Dak from the arm injury, in case you think Kyler Murray is going to get a little better. Those are my top 6 quarterbacks, not in any specific order. But when do you take the first quarterback? In my opinion, you wait on quarterbacks. And the reason why is if you're in a 1 QB league, I can see 12 QBs that can honestly finish top 5. There's so many good QBs in the league this year. There's so many that could put up very high numbers that I just don't think you should reach in the first round, second round, third round to try to get a QB when the 12th QB you take has just as much right to end up being top 3, top 4 as the guy you pick as the first QB. You take somebody like Patrick Mahomes, you got to think how much better the weighing in risk of injury, weighing in if he has an off year, weighing in if one of those other guys have a great year. Where do you take that risk of why would you take a QB so early? So me personally, and this kind of goes to the tight ends too, because I count up about 12, 13 good tight ends that I wouldn't mind having. So it's kind of the same situation with QBs and tight ends. I wouldn't take one until honestly the 7th round, maybe 8th round. And what I would do is in the first 5, 6 rounds, I think you got to come out of those first 5, 6 rounds with at least 3 running backs and at least 2 wide receivers. And the running back specifically, because I'm going to talk about this when I get into the in-depth about each player position and how many I think are good and how many before a dip down happens. I think running backs go off the board very early this year. And if you don't get a good running back that you can see starting every week in the first 4 rounds, you're going to have a hard time getting one. You're going to have to try to pick, go by that running back 0 kind of strategy that I personally don't like, and I think is horrible for this year specifically. Or you'll end up hoping that you're in a league, maybe you only start 1 running back and you go 4 wides. But I think the wide receivers are so in line with each other from 1 to maybe 20, maybe even 25, that I do not think you stand out to take a wide receiver early. I do not. Now, there are a lot of wide receivers that I think that I will think can finish in the top 10, 15. That'll be there in the 3rd round. I think the first 2 rounds are going to be very heavy running back. Out of the first 12 picks, I think maybe 9 or 10 of them could be running backs. So if you really want a confident running back that you can start every week, you have to get, I would say, 2 in the first 3 rounds. Or 3 in the first 5 rounds. You have to go heavy running back early. I think the wide receivers will slip to the 3rd, 4th, 5th round. If you go by what I consider because I wrote down a top 40 and I'll be giving it to you later in the show. If you talk about a top 40 and who you think is going to be there at that time, all the top 15, 20 running backs are gone within that top 40. But after that top 40 is done, you still have solid wide receivers that you can pick from. And it's just unbelievable to me that somebody would push to get a wide receiver when I think you can get a top 15 wide receiver like a Cooper Kupp, I think is going to have a good year, an Amari Cooper, a CeeDee Lamb. I think I'll talk a little bit more about Kenny Galladay and what I think he's going to do this year. Even a Keenan Allen. I think the DJ Moore, those are the type of guys that I think you can get in the third round, and they will not be much worse than if you were to take a first round guy and say, all right, I'm going to take Adams or take Tyreek Hill in the first round. Yes, they're going to have their monster games, and that's what puts them above everybody else, is that they have their 2 touchdown games, their big 150-yard games, and that's what puts them on top. But overall, if you go game by game performance, it's not that much better. It's not that much of a difference than taking somebody in the third round. And listen, I'll give you a perfect example. Adam Thielen. I don't have Adam Thielen in my top 20 wide receivers. And he's a guy that was a top 10 wide receiver for the past couple of years. Until last year, he was a top 10 wide receiver. Now, Jefferson has taken over him as that number 1 in Minnesota, but they don't have really a third wide receiver. Their tight end is now a second-year player, third-year player in Irv Smith, who I think will have a good year, and I'll talk about that. He's one of my sleepers. But I don't think you should rush to take a wide receiver early. I think the first 2 rounds, unless somebody like Adam slips to a second round, or somebody like Tyreek Hill slips to a second round, I think the first round, automatic running back. You have to take running back. Like I said, if Tyreek Hill or Adam slips to you at the end of the first round, maybe you take one. But other than that, you take running back. Second round, obviously, if Adams or Hill are there, you definitely take them. If A.J. Brown is there in the mid to late second round, I really like him. DK Metcalf is out there putting up good numbers. Stephon Diggs, I have him as my number 3 wide receiver, and he's somebody that you can take in the second round. But other than maybe 6 guys, the 6 guys I just mentioned with Hill, Hopkins, if you also throw in DeAndre Hopkins, Diggs, Brown, Adams, and Metcalf. In the first 2 rounds, I'm taking all running backs, to be honest, and maybe 1 tight end because you would throw in Travis Kelce in there. But it's a running back league for the first 2 rounds, and you got to get one of those first 2 rounds or you're going to screw yourself. Like I said, quarterbacks you wait on, unless you're taking Travis Kelce, which you can take him in the second round. But instead of me taking Travis Kelce in the second round, I'd rather wait and take somebody like Logan Thomas or Robert Tonyan and take him way later in the draft. My perfect strategy, what I do in my drafts is I write down 12 quarterbacks that are, even if you want to write down 10, that's fine, but 10 to 12 quarterbacks that you say, if I got the worst guy out of these 10 guys, I'm fine starting him. And what I do is I just pick running backs, pick wide receivers, and as soon as there's like 2 guys left out of that quarterback list, then I'll look at my quarterback and take one of the 2. Same thing with tight ends. I can say probably 12, 13 tight ends that I won't mind having. I write down those 12 tight ends. As soon as it gets down to 1 or 2 of them, I take the tight end. Other than that, I'm taking running backs and wide receivers until that QB and tight end lists go down. Now, the strategy will be a little bit different in 2 QB leagues, because if you're in an experienced 2 QB league, they're going to take QBs very early. In most drafts, you see about 17, 18, even as much as 20 QBs taken in the first 2 rounds of a 2 QB draft. And I like the strategy of it because you can try to take the lower tier QB and get the top running back, or you can stay in line and get a quarterbacks early and then try to get the best running back that you can in the third round. So it's a very, very new type of league that I really like playing in. I've been playing it for about 5-6 years, but it's a really fun league to be in. I definitely suggest you try a 2 QB league with 12 players, because if you do it with 10, it's still partially a normal league. Everybody's going to have a quarterback, 2 quarterbacks, and everybody's going to have a third quarterback for a bye. If you do it with 12 people, you're going to have people fighting for quarterbacks, because there's only 32 starting quarterbacks. And first of all, that means somebody's going to have the worst and second worst quarterback in the league. But second of all, for everybody to have 2 quarterbacks, that's 24. That only leaves 8. That means there's going to be 4 teams out there that do not have a quarterback on their bye. And not only that, you got to account for people getting hurt. You got to account that some people will take 4 quarterbacks in the draft. Some may even take 5. And there's going to be a lot of teams that get screwed. So it's a real fun, more strategic type of way for fantasy football if you do a 2 QB draft with 12 players. But that'll be a little bit, I'll talk about that a little bit later when I go over my quarterback rankings. But just to get to the first question on Twitter, he wanted me to give some of my sleepers and some of my overrated. Now, I don't really like to call them sleepers and busts. That's what a lot of people call them. I just like to call them overrated and underrated, because even if I call you overrated, you could still be a top 30, top 25 wide receiver. I just don't think you're going to be a top 10 like people are saying. And as a bust, listen, you may not be the top 5 running back, but I think you can finish top 10, top 15 and come out of nowhere. So let's just start off with that and go for the quarterbacks. My 2 guys that I think will be a little bit overrated, and keep in mind, like I said, I'm a big Justin Herbert fan, and I think he'll end up top 12. But I think you have to be very wary with him because a lot of QBs take a step back their second year. And I hope he doesn't. He has a lot of weapons on that team. And I think he's going to be good, but you just have to be careful. He's getting a lot of hype right now where people are putting him above Ryan Tannehill, and a couple people are putting him right in the range of Russell Wilson and Tom Brady. And you got to calm down. Him and another person I even mentioned that I didn't really put down on the list, but Jalen Hurts. Jalen Hurts, by most accounts, is ranked as a top 12 QB, and I have him as a top 12 QB also, but you have to watch out for these young guys. The first year that these guys play, they do things to the league that they say nobody's ever seen this before. They light it up, and then the second year they come back to earth. And I think you really have to watch out with some of these young QBs going into their second year of starting. So, another guy that isn't going into his second year of starting, actually going into his 4th year, but I think it's still showing with what he's done in his past and history. You may want to temper your expectation, and that's Baker Mayfield of Cleveland Browns. Now, you're on a team that has a lot of weapons. You have Odell Beckham Jr., you have Jarvis Landry, you have a good tight end right now in Hooper. You have good third wide receiver. You drafted Anthony Swartz. You got Rashard Higgins. You have everything that you could possibly want. And the big thing is you have Nick Chubb in the backfield. And even if Nick Chubb went down, you got Kareem Hunt. So you have a great offense. He has all the weapons. They have a good offensive line. He barely gets sacked. The only problem that I say to temper your expectations with Baker Mayfield is they run the ball so much. They are a run-first team. They will run the ball down your throat. And if it's 3rd down and 5, they may decide to run the ball more times than pass. So they are just a heavy running team. So you have to be beware of, even though he has good weapons, even though he looks like he should be a top 5, at worst, top 10 quarterback, you have to watch out and beware of that because you have to see what type of strategies these teams run. And everybody can't do what Ryan Tannehill did last year. The Tennessee Titans are a complete rushing team, but he threw for over 30 touchdowns. In the years that he's been started for the 2 years, he's accounted for over 60 touchdowns. And that's not normal for a team that's a heavy rushing team. So it's very hard to do that. So I just want you to temper your expectations with somebody like a Baker Mayfield. If you're in a 2 QB league, I think you take him as your second QB. You don't take him as your number 1 QB. Now, 2 guys that I think will be better than expected, a little bit underrated, are 2 guys that now, first of all, they're 2 guys that may not even start the year as their starters. And I kind of mentioned it earlier when I talked about rookie quarterbacks coming onto the league. And one is obviously Mr. Fields from Chicago. Shout out to all the Chicago people that listen to me. I know there's a lot of y'all. And also Trey Lance from San Fran. Those are 2 young rookie quarterbacks. They may not start the year as their starters, but both of them can run. They're both very athletic. And the thing about athletic running quarterbacks is that if they have a bad game trying to pass the ball, they may throw an interception or 2. They may not make the right reads. Their legs save their day. You can see somebody throw for 150 yards, but they run for 100 yards, and all of a sudden they have a good day. And the perfect person I will point out for this is Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson, in my mind, is still not a good full quarterback. He's a running quarterback, and he needs to run to be able to be effective. He's not a good quarterback, in my opinion, yet. But he can light the league on fire because he's electric with the football in his hands, and he can take over a game at points. But there's a lot of times where he's trying to take over the game, and as a quarterback, you have to be able to take over the game with your arm. And he hasn't been able to take over the game with his arm yet. And the thing about Fields and about Lance, they both, in my opinion, have better arms than Lamar Jackson. So if you have somebody that is not as athletic, but very, very athletic, and they have a better arm than the former MVP of the league, I think that's somebody you definitely have to look out for. So both Fields and Lance are 2 guys that I think are really underrated for the quarterbacks. For the running backs, 2 guys that are overrated, I'm going to say Raheem Mostert just because, one, they drafted Trey Sermon. There's a lot of hype around Trey Sermon. I don't think Sermon will start the year as the starter, but I think he will eventually grow into that role. Mostert and him could probably split time for a little bit, but I really liked Sermon in college, and I really see him eventually taking over that role. He just has to get a little bit better with the pass protection. And another one is Mixon from the Cincinnati Bengals. He's just been a disappointment. That's just the biggest thing with him. He has all the athletic tools. He just can't put it together. I mean, you can blame their line, which is very fair, but we're not the ones who to put the place on the blame. We're just looking right now at what the production is, and his production is not what it should be at this point. He's too talented to be doing what he's doing. So he's somebody that, even though I have him in the top 20, 24 running backs, one, like I said, running backs are going to go really high. So you're going to have a decision on if to take somebody like Mixon in the 3rd round, maybe the 4th round, or would you take maybe the 15th best wide receiver? It's going to be a decision that you're going to have. And I just want you to temper your expectations that I don't think that Mixon's going to have a great year. And the same thing with Raheem Mostert. Moving on to two guys that I think will have sleeper years and have underrated list right now. Myles Gaskin, the running back from Miami. He has no challenger really to take carries away from him. I think that Miami offense is going to be a little bit more rushing than passing, even though they have good passing weapons. And I think that he's in a good position right now where the Dolphins are getting better. They want to challenge for the AFC East. And they're going to have to run the ball because I don't think they fully trust Tua yet to air it out. And until they do, they're going to lean a lot on their running backs. So that leaves Gaskin in a good position. Another guy, Zach Moss, right in the AFC East also. I am very, very, very high on Zach Moss. I think he could end up being the best running back in his class. That's how much I like Mr. Moss. And Zach Moss didn't really get a chance to fully prove himself because he got hurt last year. But he is one of those guys that you can see for the size he has. He has above average speed. He's not a burner, obviously, but he's a big guy. But he has really, really great vision, and he has quick feet. He doesn't have the speed, but he has quick feet. And if you have good vision and quick feet, that's going to make you into a good running back. Buffalo is a team that's going to run the ball a lot. Obviously, Allen's going to take some of his touchdowns away, but I don't think Devin Singletary is going to take too much of his hype away. I have Zach Moss also in that range of the 20 to 25 running backs. And I think he has a chance that if he's given the full reins, he could finish in the top 10, top 15. So I'm really high on Zach Moss. Moving on to the wide receivers, two guys that I think have been, and I've been a person who's overrated them also. Odell Beckham Jr., keep waiting for him to show up like he did with the Giants and beat the New York Giants. Odell, it may time be finally here to just call it and say he's not going to do it. I think he's still going to be a solid wide receiver because he just has great hands. He still has good speed. So I think he'll still be a solid wide receiver, but he has three things working against him. One, his age. Right when you get around age 30 is where you start slowing down, and he's right around there. So his age is against him. Two, the offense that he's playing in, because like I said earlier with Baker Mayfield, you can't expect a bunch of passes because you're on a team that runs the ball a lot. And three, he's on a team that he may not even be the top wide receiver on the team. As Jarvis Landry, I'm very happy for him. He's finally starting to shine a little bit and starting to get a little bit more credit than he actually deserved before. He's getting more credit than he was given before, and he definitely deserves it. So I think Odell is one of those guys who you do rank him in those top 20, top 25 guys, but it's hard to pull the trigger on him because you're going to he's going to get drafted earlier than he should. He's going to get drafted to be what he was with the Giants, and he's not with the Giants anymore. He's just not the same type of person. So between age, between the type of team he's on, between the people that's on his team with other weapons, and he's coming off an injury, and that's another thing that's against him. He's coming off a big time serious injury, and it's just too tough to pick somebody like that right now. Another guy who's coming off a big injury that was a 1,300-yard wide receiver the year before, Cortland Sutton from the Denver Broncos. If you listened to the show a couple weeks ago, you heard Troy Rank talk about to temper your expectations with him. And he's a guy who may end the year much better than he starts the year, but I just don't see him being the top guy. And the guy that I think will be the top guy on that team, he mentioned that week, is the guy that is one of my underrated guys, Jerry Jeudy. Jerry Jeudy was my number 2 wide receiver the year that he came out. CeeDee Lamb was number 1. And I think Jeudy is ready to have a monster year. I think he's going to have an 1,200-yard season. I think he's going to be number 1 guy for the Broncos. I think he's going to be the reason that Courtland Sutton is not there in a year. And I think Jeudy is going to show why a lot of people considered him the top wide receiver in the draft last year. And for some reason, I keep bringing it up, the Raiders took Henry Ruggs. Don't get it, but another guy that I think is going to be a little bit underrated at wide receiver, Kenny Galladay. I mentioned him earlier. And it's not, first of all, I think Galladay is a really good player. I think that he's a big body. He's not super fast, but he has above average speed. He has good hands. And the thing about him is that they don't trust anybody else on that Giants team. I mean, you throw it to Evan Ingram, he drops everything. And that's the reason why they got Kyle Rudolph, who's an older player. Shepard, he's starting to get a little bit injury prone. You brought in Kadarius Toney in the first round out of Florida. He's definitely not ready. I wouldn't even have him as a first round pick. I thought he should have been a second round pick, but when it reached and took him a little bit early, he's proven that he's not ready yet. They just don't have people that they trust to throw the ball to in those in big situations. Galladay's going to get peppered with so many targets. I think he will be top 5 in targets this year. That's how high I think he's going to be. He's going to get at least the chances that he can explode with numbers and be on a bad team. So he may have a new quarterback the year after if Daniel Jones doesn't work out, but that's another story for another show. Moving on to tight ends. One of the guys that I think may be a little bit overrated. Now, like I said, I think he's going to be top 10. But I think he may be a bit overrated is Kyle Pitts, the rookie out of Atlanta. The reason why? Now, obviously, you can like him because he's going to be peppered with targets, too, because all they have is Calvin Ridley. And I think Calvin Ridley is going to be a monster this year. I think he'll probably be the number 7, 8 wide receiver. But I think he's going to have a bunch of targets now that Julio's in there. Pitts is going to have the targets. But if you go back in the history of the game, it is very hard for tight ends to make a huge impact during the first year. Especially if you're a first round running back tight end. If you look at all the top tight ends in the league, almost none of them are first round picks. They're guys that just worked hard, came out of nowhere, and they had athletic ability, whether they're a second round pick, third round pick, some even undrafted, and they worked out. Kyle Pitts comes in with a lot of pressure on him because there's, in the history of the NFL, I think it's only been once or twice that a tight end's ever been taken top 5. I think Mike Ditka was maybe 5th. And then there was one guy who didn't even play tight end that will end up that played tight end in college, drafted as a tight end, and that was it. So it's really, really tough for me to put a lot into Kyle Pitts. And I think he's going to be drafted high because he's being drafted as a top 5 tight end. And if you're drafted, I personally would rather have somebody like TJ Hawkinson before Kyle Pitts. And I think you can get him a round or 2 lower. So I'd rather go the Hawkinson route than go Kyle Pitts, who's very hyped up right now. But just to move on to the defenses, I want to give you my top 5 defenses this year. I think the Rams will be number 1, Bucks will be number 2, Ravens number 3, Bills number 4, and the Washington football team number 5. So, just wanted to give you my rankings for those positions, just to say how people should go, where people should go, how the top people are, who's overrated, who's underrated. I'll go through those real quick, who my top 12 or top 20 are, depending on the position, right at the end of the show. But I just want to address some more questions on Twitter. The impact of Travis Etienne getting hurt, James Robinson. Now, I really liked Etienne. I had him as a top 18 running back before. Obviously, he's out for the year. James Robinson, who played very well last year, steps back into that role. I personally don't completely trust him yet. Because of that, I'm not taking him as my starter. And when I say starter, I mean top running back or second running back. I'm looking at him as more my flex position or third running back if you're allowed to do that. I just don't trust him enough on that bad team. I understand that Urban Meyer wants to run the ball, and he wants to run it from multiple people. Etienne was going to be his guy. Robinson can't do the same things that Etienne can do. I would take him, and if he works out, you have a really good flex guy. I would look for him probably in the full fifth round. That's probably right around the range I would look for him. So fifth round is where you look for him and take him as a flex, and that's it. Like I said, your third running back. I wouldn't take him before that. I think there's the running backs, like I said, you have to go early. And the middle running backs, which is after like the first 15, 20 guys, those last starters that are like 12 to 15 guys that are in startable plate players, those are flex guys. You don't take, in my opinion, you don't take them before the fifth round. That's the best you take them. And the worst part about those guys is that they're right in the range where you're still taking a good wide receiver. So you're almost deciding, should I take a good wide receiver? Should I take Chris Godwin? Should I take Jamar Chase? Or should I take a James Robinson? I'm personally taking a wide receiver. So that's my strategy. Get the running backs early so that you're not in that position where you're rating a James Robinson versus a Jamar Chase or versus a Chris Godwin. I'd rather get my running backs early so I don't have to deal with that situation. But if you are targeting James Robinson, I would try to get him in the fifth round about that. The other obvious big change that happened this week, the impact of the Sony Michel trade to the Rams and how it hurts Darrell Henderson. Now, I am very high on Darrell Henderson. Before this trade, I had him ranked as a top 10 running back. I think, now, keep in mind, I was also very high on Cam Akers. I think whoever the running back in that offense is going to be a top 10 running back. And if Henderson stays healthy, and this is the biggest thing with him, and it's been this way since he was at Memphis all the way in college, he's never had the lead role just by himself. He's always had a second person there to take some of the carries off of him, try to limit him to maybe 20 touches a game. He was never a high carry guy. While he's in there, I think he's very productive. I think he can be still a top 10 running back, even with Sony Michel on the team, but you can't draft him that high. You can't draft him in the second round. Now, in the third round, that's where you start thinking about him. That's the right around the range that you say, all right, Henderson, I think maybe fits here. Now, I have him personally top of the third round. If you take him late second, early third, or very early third, then he's worth it. So that's where I look at Henderson. Where you look at Sony Michel, I think he's a guy that if Henderson gets hurt, then he turns into a top 10 running back. People don't understand this about that offense, is that everybody talks about Sean McVay likes to throw the ball around, and he does like to throw the ball around, but he predicates his offense on running the ball. That's why they went to the Super Bowl when Todd Gurley was really Todd Gurley and had that monster year. Since Todd Gurley has gotten hurt, they haven't been the same. They didn't change the wide receivers. They still got Cooper Kupp. They didn't change the wide receivers. They still have Woods at wide receiver. And then they're trying to float around the third wide receiver. They had Josh Reynolds. They had Van Jefferson. Now they got Deshaun Jackson. But those people weren't changing. It's the running game. The running game. Since Todd Gurley was not Todd Gurley, they have not been the same. And that's what they're hoping to do right now. And they tried to do it last year. As you saw Cam Akers, he took over last year, and you saw they were able to do pretty good last year, got into the playoffs and played well. But without a stud running back, that offense is not the same. So they're going to run the ball. And if if Henderson stays healthy, it's going to work out. If he doesn't, then they're going to have to switch off and hope that this trade, Sony Michel, pans out and he goes back to what he was 2 years ago. I just think he was in a bad situation in New England. And I think the emergence of Stevenson, their rookie, I think that pushed him out because Stevenson looks really explosive. He's a 230-pound back. He's not super fast, but he has good speed. He's able to break tackles and shake tackles. I think he's a guy that is a big sleeper. That I'm not mentioning him now formally as a sleeper, but I think he's somebody that if you want to draft at the end of the draft just to have him on your roster, that's somebody you take. So you take Stevenson from the New England Patriots. I think it'll work out in the end, especially if somebody gets hurt. Obviously, the top guy for them is Harris. And Damian Harris, I'm a really big fan of him. I think he'll be a top 15 running back. But one slip up of injury, and Stevenson's going to take over that running back in New England. Let me just give you my rundown of the position rankings, just so you know who my top 12 is, my top 20 is of each position. Now, I did it a little bit different. I've been doing it this way for a couple years, and I think it helps people more with their draft because I'm not exactly telling you exactly who to draft. I'm giving you a group of guys and saying if any of those guys is there, take them. So for quarterbacks, top six, I have a first tier of 6 quarterbacks. If Josh Allen, Dak Prescott, Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, Kyler Murray, or Aaron Rodgers are there in the range that you want to take a quarterback, those are the top 6. If they're there, take them. As I said, I usually write down 12 and try to look at it when it's the last 2 guys left or 3 guys. My second group has Ryan Tannehill, Justin Herbert, Jalen Hurts, Russell Wilson, Matthew Stafford, and Tom Brady. So if any of those 12 guys that I just mentioned, if you want to draft like me, write down those 12 guys I just mentioned. And when there's about 2 of them left, then you draft. Before that, don't even look at quarterback. If you're in a 2 QB league, then the next guys you would look at for, in my opinion, for your second quarterback would be Matt Ryan, obviously Joe Burrow, Jameis Winston, who I think is going to win that job in New Orleans. And I think he has that arm that he can still keep that offense going. But you can't trust him too much. That's why I put him as a number 2 quarterback and not as a number 1. The rookie Trevor Lawrence, obviously. Baker Mayfield and Kirk Cousins. That'll be the next group. And just to round it off, if you are in a 2 QB league, so you can know the whole rankings, my last 6 would be Tua, Big Ben, Cam if he starts. If he doesn't, then you can go into like the Carson Wentz and that next tier. Ryan Fitzpatrick, Fields, if he ends up starting, will be at least in that ranking. Derek Carr will be there. Trey Lance will be in that group if for some reason that he ends up starting. If Fields and Lance are not starting, the next person I do have up there would be Daniel Jones in that number 2 at the end of the number 2 quarterbacks. Moving on to the tight ends, just to get the short list out of the way. Top 6. First of all, Kelsey's number 1. There's no question about that. In my opinion, Waller and Kittle are 2 and 3. I think there's a little bit of a grouping between Hockenson and Andrews and then Pitts. I think those are the top 6 right now. Like I said, we've been disappointed by tight ends before, so it's very hard to get hyped up for tight ends. If you go to my second group, this part is not in order, but you got Goddard, you got Goddard, you got Gesicki, Fant, Logan Thomas, Irv Smith, who I mentioned earlier. Did not mention earlier. I didn't mention him. So let me get back to him. Robert Tonyan also having that second tier. So if you have those 12 guys, if you want to draft like me, write down those 12 and take one when there's 2 or 3 left. But Irv Smith is a guy who was very explosive at Alabama. He's a tight end who can block, he can run, he can catch, and he has to be a combo tight end. He has everything you want to see. He's been buried behind Kyle Rudolph for his first couple years in the league. Kyle Rudolph is now with the Giants. And like I mentioned earlier, Minnesota doesn't have a number 3 wide receiver that stands out. So I think they're going to be going to the tight end a lot. Obviously, they run the ball a lot because they have Dalvin Cook in the backfield. But if you want a sleeper tight end that could really shine and do a lot better than most people are expecting, take a look at Irv Smith. He's a real good sleeper that I like at tight end. Now, moving on to my running backs and wide receivers. At running back, group of 6. Now, really, there's a group of 4 because Christian McCaffrey is by far the number 1. I personally like Alvin Kamara as number 2. I think that we're seeing less and less of Latavius Murray, and from what I'm hearing, Latavius Murray may not even keep his job as the number 2. So I think the number 2 is Alvin Kamara. Number 3, I have Derrick Henry. If you're in PPR, you may want to put Dalvin Cook, but I still am confident in Derrick Henry as the number 3 running back. Dalvin Cook would be number 4. Then Saquon Barkley at number 5. I actually have him as maybe a top 3 or 4, but because of injury, you have to push him back. And then number 6, Nick Chubb. But I think all those guys are in that top tier. Now, other than Christian McCaffrey, if you pick 2 through 6, you take one of those guys and be happy. It really doesn't matter what order you pick them in. The only guy that could jump into that if you really are in a PPR league and really like him is Austin Eckler. And I have him in my second tier with Austin Eckler, with Zeke Elliott, with Taylor, with Nick Harris, with Harris from the Pittsburgh Steelers, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, I think he's a guy that I had high hopes for last year. He got hurt as he was a little up and down last year, but I think he could be really good for KC. He's a guy that could end up in the top 5 if you're not really paying attention. And obviously you have Jones from Green Bay. Aaron Jones re-signed his new contract. I wasn't sure they were going to do it because I really like A.J. Dillon, but they'll use the two-headed attack and keep both of them, and Jones should be a top 10 to 12 running back this year. Just to move on to the next group, I think Antonio Gibson, Swift, Sanders, Montgomery. I mentioned Henderson before, and Jacobs will be the range of the right in the 13 to 18 range. And just to finish off with the starters, Ronald Jones, Mike Davis. I mentioned Damian Harris earlier. Joe Mixon, Zach Moss, and J.K. Dobbins. A lot of people are high on Dobbins, but I think between having Gus Edwards, between having Lamar Jackson, and everybody else there running the ball, it's tough for me to put Dobbins much higher than, let's say, top 20. It's really tough to do that. Moving on to the wide receivers, my group of 6 at the top. I kind of mentioned them earlier. Obviously, number 1, you have Devontae Adams. After Adams, you have Tyreek Hill. Then I have Stephon Diggs, A.J. Brown, DK Metcalf, and DeAndre Hopkins. After that group of 6, my second group is people that I have highlighted by Calvin Ridley, Terry McLaurin, and then Mike Evans, Julio Jones, Justin Jefferson, and Mr. Robinson, who people forget about all the time over there in Chicago. Moving up to the next group, and the second group of wide receivers, people that should still be starters, CeeDee Lamb and Amari Cooper are having the same group because I'm not sure who's really going to end the year as number 1 wide receiver. I think they're both going to get over 1,000 yards. They're both going to flirt with 8 to 10 touchdowns. I think they're both going to have a good year. I mentioned Galladay earlier, Keenan Allen, DJ Moore, and another guy I think is going to have a really good year is Cooper Kupp. He's been kind of held back by having Jared Goff there the past 4 years or so, or 4 or 5 years, how long Goff has been there. But I think with Stafford, who has a stronger arm, I think he's a better quarterback. I think he's going to have a better year and a more consistent year. Now, he's not young. He may be young because he came into the league. I think he was like 23 when he came into the league. So he's not young. He's already up there in age, but I think he can still have another couple good years in him. And I think that's a guy that you can take, I would say probably in the 3rd round, 4th round. If you took Cooper Kupp in the 4th round, I think you'll still be good with him. I think he'll last till then. He's not going to go in the first 2.5, 3 rounds. So you can probably get him in the 4th round, and he'll put up top 20 numbers for you. So I really like that. Moving on to the next group is after that, I have Chris Godwin, Adam Thielen, Odell Beckham Jr. that I mentioned earlier. Obviously, Mike. Now, I'll get to Michael Thomas in a second. Jamar Chase, Tyler Lockett. Now, Michael Thomas is a guy that you're taking a big risk because he's going to miss the start of the season. He may miss, 4 weeks. He may miss, who knows? You really don't know how long he's going to be out. There's no set time yet. So you're taking a risk on him, but the ceiling and the reward can be so high because he's a guy who can be a number 1 wide receiver. He's been a top 5 wide receiver before. So you're taking a chance that, you know what? It's the 3rd round. Not even the 3rd round. It's the 4th round. And is Michael Thomas there? Or you're looking at, I don't know, maybe J.K. Dobbins, maybe Damian Harris. And you're like, how could I pass on Michael Thomas? That decision is going to be made up to you. I put him in that group with Chase and Odell and Thielen. Those are pretty much all guys that could have good years. They've been top guys before, but we don't know if they're going to continue it. And obviously in Jamar Chase, he hasn't done it before, so he has to prove it. So those are more of the prove it guys. After you get past those first 18, 20 guys, you're going to guys that you say, all right, prove to me that you can still be a top 15 wide receiver. So that group of Godwin, Thielen, Odell, Thomas, Chase, and Lockett, those are prove it guys. See if they can still do it for another year. With that said, that goes over my running backs, goes over my wide receiver, it goes over all the positions. I just want to go over what my top 25 guys would be if it was me picking. Number 1, Christian McCaffrey. There's no doubt that he will go first in 99% of leagues. He just puts up outstanding numbers, whether Carolina is good, whether Carolina is bad. He's going to put up numbers. He stays on the field for 99% of the plays. And usually when you say that, that's kind of tongue-in-cheek, saying that they don't come off the field. He literally never comes off the field unless he's hurt. And before last year he wasn't hurt, he played 99.9% of the plays. So that's just what he does. So we'll see if they scale him back a little bit, because they do have another running back behind him now, and it's just a different situation because he's coming off an injury. So you kind of have to say, all right, they drafted Chuba Hubbard. He's a solid running back. Are they going to get him on the field a little bit, rest McCaffrey, maybe because of the injury? Or are they going to go back to what he was 2 years ago, and he was just on the field 99% of the time? Either way, I think he's going to be a top running back. Just go with him. I talked earlier about Kamara. I think Kamara, Henry, 2, 3, either one. People will put Cook in there with them. I think it's kind of a group of 2 to 4 between Kamara, Henry, and Cook. Everybody has those guys grouped up for 2, 3, and 4. Now, whether you're doing PPR or whether you're doing regular, I kind of like most of the same ways, because you don't see the Adrian Petersons anymore. You don't see the guys there's not too many guys that'll run the ball and they can't catch. Most of these running backs can catch. Now, obviously, a Christian McCaffrey will catch 100 balls. So there's certain levels to it. But I'll give you a perfect example, and this is the comparison that most people will give in PPR, Dalvin Cook versus Derrick Henry. You look at Dalvin Cook, and Dalvin Cook will catch passes. He's a guy who can do it either way. If you look for the past couple years, he usually catches about 40 or 50 receptions. So they push him up a little bit more. He'll give you those extra 300, 400, even 500 receiving yards. So it's kind of hard to say, all right, in PPR, I want to go with this guy. So I understand if that's what you want to do. However, you look at the difference in rushing stats between a Cook and a Henry, and Henry's is so much higher. And then when you look, all right, he's only going to get you maybe an extra 100 or 200 receiving yards. So you're losing, let's say at worst, you're losing 20 points for receiving yards, and you're losing 24 receptions. Let's say if you have a 1 point per reception, you're using 20, 25. So you're losing out on 45 points. But then you start looking at the amount of rushing yards. One guy's putting up 2,000 rushing yards, and the other guy's putting up 15. You've already made up the points already. So if one person's getting 500 more rushing yards, but they're only losing out on 20 points on receiving yards and 25 points on receptions, you might as well take the guy who's getting 2,000 yards. I mean, 2 years in a row, Henry has outrushed Cook by more than 400 yards. So it's not like it's a drastic difference in terms of their total points. So I think it's pretty close to say, take the guy who's a better player. And I think at this point, I think it's Derrick Henry. I think because of injuries, it's Derrick Henry. So I go with Derrick Henry. But if you want to go to Cook, I have them in the same tier. So whatever you want to do. Just want to get through these. We've got about 2 minutes left in the show. After that group of 4, you got Barkley and Chubb, who I think definitely should be in that 5-6 range. If you want to take a wide receiver, this is where you can take it, because Devontae Adams will be right there in that 5 to 7 range. I personally wait till about 7 to take him. Then you go with, then you have Aaron Jones there. You have Jonathan Taylor, Tyreek Hill. Elliott comes in at 11, so I still try to go towards the running backs if you're right at the end of the first round. Stephon Diggs is right there at 12, then Clyde Edwards-Helaire at 13. So you can have your choice. You can have especially if you're in PPR, because I got Eckler right after that. So you got Elliott, you got Edwards, you got Edwards-Helaire, you got Eckler, you got Diggs. So you can go either option in that range of end of the first round, early second round. I still lean towards running back, but I look at running backs that can catch. And you look at somebody, if Edwards-Helaire is there. You look at if Austin Eckler is there. Those are perfect guys that if you can get them at the end of first round, early second round, you take them automatically. You definitely do in a PPR. And in a regular league, I even consider doing it at that time, because their receptions can be so high, it can offset what they won't get in rushing yards. So that's kind of how I would say round out the end of the first round. Somebody like A.J. Brown, you try to get in the mid-second round or early second round. He may drop to the end of the second, but I want to take the chance if you really want him. Harris from the Pittsburgh Steelers, you try to take him in that second round if you want him. Some other guys that you may be wondering about. I mentioned early Henderson. I have him ranked as 24th, so if you want to get him, if you desperately want to get him, you take him at the end of the second round, or else you can wait to the third round. I think overall that pretty much it gets in line that you're just taking running backs and wide receivers. There's not that much of a big difference between PPR and most of these players. It can boost some guys like Austin Eckler, but it makes Austin Eckler probably fight for an even top 6 running back if you're doing PPR. But other than that, it's not too much of a difference. But that's about it for this week's show. It's another show that, listen, we'll be back next week talking football again. We'll try to have some more beat writers on. If not, we'll be another week closer to the season. And all I got to say is enjoy the football season. Most of your fantasy football drafts are in the upcoming week, and I will catch you next week. You can catch me on Twitter if you got any questions. PACMAN 453323. Peace out, guys.